I remember the exact moment I first realized something was wrong. It wasn't a big event, no grand betrayal, no shouting match. Just a feeling, a shift, something small and insidious that wormed its way into my life. It started with a phone call from Marissa, my younger sister, the one I'd always thought of as my closest confidant. She'd been back in town for a few weeks, and things had been fine, or at least I thought they were. But then, that afternoon, she invited me to lunch, and I should have known something was off by the tone of her voice. It wasn't the warm, playful tone I'd known for decades. It was cool, almost calculating. "You know, Ellie, I've been thinking a lot about the family business," she began, her voice sounding distracted, as if she were reading from a script. I didn't know it at the time, but this would be the beginning of the end. We sat in our usual spot at the diner, a place we'd gone since we were kids. The same booth, the same menu with greasy burgers and coffee that could put hair on your chest. I'd never have guessed that Marissa, my own sister, could be capable of deceit. But as she spoke, it felt like the walls of my world were slowly crumbling down, piece by piece. "I think it might be time to make some changes. You've been doing the same thing for so long, Ellie. Don't you think it's time to let someone else take the reins?" Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd spent 25 years of my life building our family's business from the ground up. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and it was ours. My father had passed when I was young, and my mother's health had declined soon after. The business, which had been a modest little antique shop, became my responsibility. I nurtured it, made it a home, and made it thrive. The idea that Marissa, my own sister, could suggest I simply step aside was absurd. But it wasn't just the suggestion, it was the way she said it, like it was a foregone conclusion. I stared at her, trying to piece together what she was saying. I saw how she avoided my eyes, how her fingers tapped nervously on the table. It wasn't like her to be so distant, so detached. "Are you saying you want to take over?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, though I had a feeling I already knew the answer. Her eyes met mine then, but there was no warmth there. "I've got a plan, Ellie. I've been talking to some people in the city, investors. They see the potential in the business. I think it's time we made some changes, expanded. We could really do something big if we work together." She made it sound so simple, so clean, as if she were talking about flipping a light switch. But it was never that simple. "Together?" I repeated, almost laughing in disbelief. "Marissa, I've been running this business by myself for 25 years, and now you think you can just walk in and take over?" She leaned in, her voice lowering, as if she were sharing some great secret. "It's not like that, Ellie. I'm not trying to take over. I'm trying to help you. You've worked so hard, but maybe it's time to let go. Let someone else guide it into the future." I should have seen it then. I should have known what was happening, but I didn't. I was too caught up in the thought of losing everything I'd worked so hard for. The idea that my sister, the woman I loved, could be so calculating, it didn't make sense. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust her, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. As the lunch went on, the conversation drifted to lighter topics, a movie we'd seen together years ago, an old friend of ours who'd gotten married. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the words she'd said. "Let go. Let someone else guide it into the future." It echoed in my thoughts, getting louder with each passing minute. That night, I sat in my small apartment, staring at the half-finished glass of wine in front of me. My fingers traced the rim absent-mindedly, and I tried to calm my mind. But I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face, his hands rough from working the shop, his smile when he spoke about how proud he was of me. And I remembered my mother, always so sickly, but never once did she ask for anything more than that I take care of what they'd built together. I couldn't let Marissa ruin it, not without understanding why. I knew it was coming. I could feel it in my bones. This wasn't just about the business. There was something bigger happening, something I hadn't yet figured out, and I wasn't going to sit back and let it happen without a fight. Not again. As I sit here now, writing these words, it's hard to believe that I ever thought I could trust my sister with everything. Marissa and I, We had always been close, or so I thought. I often wonder where it all went wrong. Was it when she left the town to chase her dreams? Or was it when she decided that the only way forward was through betrayal? I've always thought of myself as someone who values loyalty, someone who holds family above all else. But in the end, loyalty isn't something you can demand. It's something you earn. And Marissa, she had made her choices. Now, I had to make mine. The days after that lunch with Marissa passed in a blur. At first, I couldn't bring myself to believe that my sister would do something so calculated, so cold. But the more I thought about it, the more the pieces began to fall into place. I started replaying the events of the past few months in my mind, and it was like seeing a picture that was already drawn, but I just hadn't noticed it until now. I knew Marissa well enough to know that she never did anything without a reason. She wasn't the kind of person to act out of the goodness of her heart. Everything she did had an angle. I should have seen it earlier. She'd been subtly distancing herself, acting like she was doing me a favor when, in fact, she was positioning herself for something bigger. I spent the next few days in a fog, haunted by the idea that my sister, the one person I trusted more than anyone, could be so manipulative. I kept going to work every day, running the shop as usual, but something inside me had shifted. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking on a tightrope, and one wrong step would send everything I'd worked for tumbling down. The next time I saw Marissa, it wasn't at the diner or even at the family home. No, she showed up at the shop, unexpectedly, as if she had every right to be there. I remember the way she walked in, all smiles and charm, but something in her eyes made my stomach twist. "Hey, Ellie," she said, her voice bright. "I was just thinking about what we talked about the other day. I really think it's a great idea to expand the business. I've got a few people I know who might be able to help with that." I could feel the walls closing in around me. "Expand? You mean take over, don't you?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. Marissa blinked, feigning surprise. "What are you talking about?" "I told you, I just want to help. We've got a lot of potential here, and you're not getting any younger. Ellie, don't you want to leave something behind for the future?" Her words were meant to sound like concern, but I heard the underlying message loud and clear. It wasn't about the future, it was about her. She wanted what I had built, and she wanted it for herself. "I'm not getting any younger, huh?" I repeated the words to myself, letting them settle into the pit of my stomach. Was she trying to manipulate me into stepping aside? Was she using my age against me? It stung in a way I hadn't expected. I had to fight to keep my voice steady. "Marissa, this business is mine. It was my father's, and it's mine now. I've worked my whole life for it. I don't need you to come in and tell me what to do." Her smile faltered for just a second, and I saw a flicker of something, annoyance, perhaps, or frustration, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that same mask of sweetness. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Ellie," she said softly, but the edge in her tone was unmistakable. "I'm just trying to help. If you want to stay stuck in the past, that's your choice. But don't be surprised if you wake up one day and realize you've lost everything." I froze. That was it, wasn't it? She wasn't just trying to help. She was trying to break me. She wanted me to feel weak, vulnerable, so that I'd hand everything over to her. The thought of it made my blood boil. "You think I'm stuck in the past?" I said, taking a step toward her, my voice low but firm. "No, Marissa, I'm not stuck, but I can see exactly what you're doing, and I won't let you take what's mine." She paused, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. For a brief moment, I saw something flicker in her, something darker than the sister I had once known, but it was gone almost immediately, and her mask of sweetness returned. "I'm not trying to take anything from you," she said, almost too calmly, "but if you can't see that this is for the best, then maybe you're the one who needs to change. I'll give you some space to think about it, but don't wait too long. People are always looking for opportunities, Ellie." I watched her leave, her footsteps clicking against the floor, and it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. The nerve of her, the audacity. She hadn't even tried to hide her intentions. She was playing a game, and she was good at it. As the door clicked shut behind her, I stood there in stunned silence, my mind racing. What had just happened? Was I imagining things? Or had she just made it clear that she would stop at nothing to get what she wanted? I used to think that family was something you could always count on, but now, I wasn't so sure. Marissa's actions, her words, everything about her had changed. I couldn't recognize her anymore. And worse, I didn't know who she had become. I thought about my father, how he would have handled this. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he had something to say, people listened. He had always believed in loyalty, in the strength of family, but even he had warned me about people who would try to take what wasn't theirs. I had brushed it off then, thinking he was just being paranoid. But now, I wondered if he had seen this coming all along. I couldn't just let this happen. I couldn't let my sister tear everything I had built apart. I had to do something, and I had to do it fast. The days turned into weeks, and I tried to keep my focus on the shop. But Marissa's words haunted me, echoing in every corner of my mind. "You're not getting any younger, Ellie." The way she'd said it, with that false sweetness, made my skin crawl. And then there was the subtle suggestion that I was stuck in the past. I wasn't stuck. I had never been stuck. But she was right about one thing. I wasn't getting any younger. Time, it seemed, was not on my side. But if I was going to lose everything I'd worked for, it wouldn't be without a fight. I spent the following days doing what I did best, observing. Marissa had always been a creature of habit, and the patterns she followed became increasingly clear. She'd drop by the shop at odd hours, under the guise of checking in, but it wasn't to offer help. It was to watch me, to learn where my weaknesses were, to figure out how to worm her way in. I played along, pretending I didn't notice. I greeted her with a smile, served her coffee, listened to her talk about her plans, her big ideas for the future. She was smooth, convincing, but every word out of her mouth felt like a lie. And I was beginning to see that the more I let her think I was naive, the more power I had. But I knew this game was dangerous. I couldn't be too obvious in my suspicion. If Marissa realized I was onto her, she'd retreat and become more careful. I needed her to feel comfortable. I needed her to think she was still in control. Meanwhile, I took to digging into her life. It wasn't hard. Not really. People in town talked. They always did. I started visiting the local cafes, running into old acquaintances, asking casual questions about the people Marissa had been meeting, the business deals she'd been making. It didn't take long for the pieces to start falling into place. Marissa had been talking to investors from the city, people I didn't know, people who weren't trustworthy. She'd even been trying to convince some of the shop's suppliers to work with her instead of me. Slowly, methodically, she was pushing me out. And I was only just beginning to understand the extent of it. She wasn't just trying to take over the business. She was trying to erase me from the picture entirely. The more I learned, the more I realized how deep this went. She had been preparing for this for months, possibly even longer. The most crushing thing of all, I had been so blinded by my own trust in her. I had missed every single sign along the way. The anger that simmered in me was nothing short of a storm. But I couldn't let it control me. If I was going to take back what was mine, I had to be smarter than her. I had to be patient, like a chess player waiting for the right moment to strike. Sometimes, I wonder if the worst part of betrayal is not the act itself, but the realization that you were blind to it for so long. How could I have been so stupid? Marissa, my sister, the one person I should have been able to trust, had been plotting behind my back for months. And I hadn't even noticed. I spent hours replaying the past in my mind, wondering where it all went wrong. Was it when she started getting more ambitious? Or was it when she left the town to chase those big city dreams? Maybe it was always there, lurking under the surface, and I had been too afraid to see it. Maybe I had wanted to see her as the innocent, charming girl I grew up with, even though that wasn't who she was anymore. It's funny how, in a way, it felt like I was the one who had to change. I wasn't the naive girl who had once trusted her sister with her life. I had become someone else, someone who had learned to play the game, to outmaneuver the ones who thought they could control me. But the question that kept me up at night was this: what would I do when I finally had the chance to take back what was mine? How far would I go to make her pay for everything she had done? It's funny how much you can learn about someone when you start looking at the world through their eyes. The more I dug into Marissa's life, the more I began to see just how carefully she had crafted her plan. Every move she made, every word she spoke, it all had purpose. She wasn't impulsive. She was precise, a predator, circling her prey, waiting for the right moment to strike. I knew that if I was going to take her down, I had to be just as calculated. I couldn't afford any mistakes. One slip, one misstep, and she'd turn the tables on me, and I'd lose everything. The first part of my plan was to gather information. I needed to know exactly who she was talking to, what deals she was making, and how deep her involvement with these investors went. I had already started asking around town, but now, I needed to dig deeper. I reached out to an old acquaintance, a man named Victor, who had worked as a contractor for the business years ago. He'd always been a quiet, observant type, and I knew he had connections in the city. I never would have trusted him with the real reason I was asking, but I didn't need to. All I needed was for him to keep his ears open. Sure enough, within days, he came back to me with information. Marissa had been meeting with a group of investors who were more than just interested in the family business. They wanted to take full control of it. They weren't just looking to expand. They wanted to wipe out everything I had built and replace it with something entirely new. Something that would serve their interests, not mine. It wasn't just a business deal. It was a full-blown takeover. I couldn't let that happen. Not now. Not after everything I'd sacrificed. I needed leverage. Something that could force her hand. Something that would make her realize she couldn't destroy me without consequences. But leverage wasn't easy to come by. Marissa had covered her tracks well. I spent days going through records, looking for any inconsistencies, any small detail that could tip the scale in my favor. Then, just when I was starting to feel the weight of the task bearing down on me, I found it. A document, buried deep in one of the drawers in my office, a contract for a loan Marissa had taken out in her name alone, without my knowledge, using the business as collateral. If things went south, the loan would put everything in jeopardy, including the shop, the house, and even our mother's property. It was a ticking time bomb, and I had it in my hands. I didn't hesitate. I photocopied the document, and then I took the original and hid it where only I could find it. The next step was clear. I needed to confront her with it, to let her know I had everything I needed to destroy her plans. But I wasn't going to make it easy for her. No, this was a game, and I was the one who was going to control the rules. That evening, I called her. "Marissa," I said, my voice steady, "we need to talk." Her tone was immediately defensive, but she didn't hesitate. "About what?" "I told you. I've already explained everything. The investors are just trying to help. Ellie, you need to stop being so stubborn." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep the anger from rising. "No, Marissa, we need to talk about you. About the loan you took out without telling me. About the plans you've been making behind my back. About how you've been slowly plotting to take everything I've worked for." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for the first time in weeks, I heard something in her voice that wasn't a mask. Fear. It was fleeting, but it was there. "Where did you get that?" she asked, her voice sharp now. "I don't think it matters where I got it," I said, my voice cold. "What matters is that you can't get away with this. I'll expose you, Marissa. I'll make sure everyone knows what you've been doing." I could almost hear her pacing, her mind scrambling for a way out. "You don't understand, Ellie. This isn't just about the business. This is about us. You and me. We're family. We should be working together." "Family?" I scoffed. "You've betrayed me, and now you want me to work with you? You think I'm going to let you destroy everything I've built? Let me be clear. Marissa, you've made your choices, and now you'll face the consequences." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then, finally, she spoke, her voice low and trembling. "I didn't mean for it to go this far, Ellie. I was just trying to. I was trying to help. I didn't want to hurt you." Her words, though filled with remorse, didn't move me. I had waited for this moment. The moment when she would realize just how far she'd fallen. And when it came, It didn't feel as satisfying as I thought it would. In truth, it made me sad. I'm not going to let you ruin me, Marissa. You're going to fix this, or I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you've done. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange emptiness settle over me. I had just exposed my sister for everything she was, and yet, there was no sense of victory, only exhaustion. This wasn't how I'd imagined it. In the movies, the bad guy always gets caught and punished. But in real life, things are messy, eh? People don't just change overnight. And family doesn't always come with the loyalty we think it should. But I couldn't back down. Not now. I had to see this through. If I didn't, I would lose everything, not just the business, but my dignity, my trust in people, and my place in the world. If I was going to win, I had to be cold. I had to be ruthless. The days that followed felt like a countdown. Every moment, every phone call, every visit to the shop was heavy with the weight of what was coming. I could feel the storm building, the tension in the air as Marissa scrambled to find a way out of the trap I'd set for her. She tried to reach me several times, but I avoided her calls. I wasn't interested in her apologies or explanations. I didn't want to hear how sorry she was, how she never meant to hurt me. I had already given her more chances than she deserved. I wasn't interested in her words anymore. I wanted action. I wanted her to fix what she had broken, or else I would make sure the truth came to light. Then, one evening, she showed up at the shop. It was late, just before closing time, and I was sorting through inventory when I heard the faint sound of footsteps. I turned around and saw her standing in the doorway, her face pale, eyes tired. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize her, the sister I had once known, the girl who had played with me in the yard, the one I had trusted more than anyone. But that person was gone, replaced by the woman standing before me, looking defeated. "Ellie," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "Can we talk?" I didn't say anything at first. I didn't want to, but I knew this moment was inevitable. I had to face her, had to make her see what she had done, and make her understand the cost of her betrayal. I didn't invite her in. I just nodded toward the chair across from me. She took a seat, but neither of us spoke for several long seconds. The silence between us was thick, suffocating, as if the air itself had become heavy with everything that had been left unsaid. Finally, she broke the silence. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice breaking as she spoke, "about everything, about the way I've treated you, about the lies I've told. I never meant for things to get so out of hand. I was trying to find my place. I thought if I could get the business to grow, if I could make something of myself, then maybe I'd finally be enough. But I was wrong, Ellie. I was so wrong." Her words were slow, measured, like she was trying to make sense of something that had only just started to come into focus. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of regret and guilt. But there was something else there too, fear. I could see it now. The fear that had been absent in her earlier visits. Fear that she was losing me for good. "You've always been enough, Marissa," I said quietly, my voice steady. "The problem was never that you weren't enough. The problem was that you thought you had to destroy me to make yourself feel worthy. You used me. You used the family business to build yourself up. And you thought I wouldn't notice." Her face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw her as she truly was, not the confident, calculating woman who had manipulated everyone around her, but a frightened little girl who was realizing the full weight of her actions. The tears started to fall then, unbidden, and she wiped at them with the back of her hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know what else to do. I was scared. I thought if I could just take control, I could finally be someone important. But now, I realize, I've lost everything that really mattered." Her words were sincere, but they didn't erase the damage she had done. They didn't take away the pain I had carried for weeks, the hurt that had gnawed at me every time I looked at her. I had loved her, trusted her, and she had taken everything for granted. She hadn't just hurt me, she had betrayed our family's legacy. "You've lost more than just the business, Marissa," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "You've lost my trust. And once that's gone, it's hard to get back." She nodded slowly. understanding that I wasn't going to forgive her just because she was sorry. "I know," she said, her voice shaky. "I don't expect you to. I wanted you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant to push you out. I just didn't know how to be anything other than what I've always been." I was silent for a long time, processing her words. I wasn't sure what I expected from her, an apology, a confession, or maybe some kind of grand gesture that would somehow make up for everything. But none of that would ever be enough. She had already crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Finally, I spoke. "The truth is, Marissa, I don't know if we can go back to what we were. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. You've shown me who you really are, and that person isn't someone I can rely on." She looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling. "I understand. I really do. But I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something other than anger or betrayal. I felt pity. Pity for the woman who had so desperately tried to control everything, only to lose it all. "I think you need to find your own way now, Marissa," I said, my voice softening just a little. "You've made your choices, and now you have to live with them. But if you ever find your way back, if you ever truly want to rebuild what we had, then maybe we can talk." She nodded, wiping her eyes one last. There were moments, in the quiet after everything had settled, when I would catch myself thinking about Marissa. I wondered what she was doing, if she was trying to rebuild her life or if she had given up entirely. I wondered if she still thought about me, about what we used to have, or if she had already moved on. But no matter what she did, I knew one thing. I had learned something about myself through this whole ordeal. I had learned that I was stronger than I realized. I had learned that betrayal didn't have to define me, that I didn't have to let it break me. It would always hurt. Of course, betrayal always did, but it no longer had the power to control me. I was no longer the woman who had trusted blindly. I was someone different now, someone who had taken back what was rightfully hers, someone who had finally learned to stand on her own. And maybe, just maybe, I'd learned to forgive her, not for her sake, but for mine, because carrying all that anger, all that bitterness, only kept me tied to the past. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could choose how I moved forward. And moving forward was the only thing that truly mattered now.